This episode of the Practice of Therapy podcast is sponsored by Mental Health Match, mentalhealthmatch.com, and also by the folks at TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com. A little over 15 years ago, when I started my private practice, I had to learn a lot, and most of it the hard way. And I don't think you need to do the same. Hi, I'm Gordon Brewer, a licensed psychotherapist, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, part of the Psychcraft network of podcasts. Join me in this journey of discovery as we have conversations with other leaders and professionals in both the mental and allied health fields. Join us as we explore both the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer, and this is episode number 262 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. And so glad you've joined us. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. And if you're coming back for more, glad you're back and glad you're following us and with me on this journey. I'm looking forward to you hearing from my guest today, Steve Bisson. And Steve is another therapist and fellow podcaster. And he has a podcast called Finding Your Way Through Therapy, where he has conversations with people about being in therapy and that sort of thing. But Steve has got a fascinating story and a really cool niche as well. And so I'm looking forward to you hearing my conversation with Steve about his private practice journey and kind of how he's landed where he's landed, as I like to say in the introductions. But before we get to Steve, real quickly though, I'd love for you to find out more about the Google Workspace for Therapists course. And in particular, I'm just letting people know I'm in the process of updating the course. And what I'm going to do with this process is I'm inviting other people to collaborate with me on this. So if you're using Google Workspace in your practice in some form or fashion, and you've got some sort of hack or tip or something you want to teach about using Google Workspace, I'd love for you to apply to my updates group or whatever. So you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/GWS updates if you'd like to be a contributor to the updates of the course. Now, the Google Workspace for Therapists course has been out for some time now. I think I first published it back in 2017 or so, I guess, but it's been around a while. And needless to say, Google just goes through lots of updates. And so the course has changed over time, and it's time to update it as well. But again, that's part of the collaboration reason for me wanting to collaborate with people and get people to contribute to the course, because one of the things that came out of my starting that course or getting it out there is also I started the Facebook group Google Workspace for Therapists, and that group's got over 9,000 members now, which just blows my mind. So the course is just intended to help people get an idea of how they can use the various tools in Google Workspace for your practice, just as kind of a practice management tool. There are some people that are using it as, particularly those people that aren't necessarily insurance-based, using it some to help keep some of their electronic records and that sort of thing. But all of that can be done in a HIPAA-secure way. And if you're using the paid version of Google Workspace. So anyway, you can find out more about the course if you're interested. And if you have not enrolled in the course and would like to, anytime someone enrolls in the course, they have lifetime access. Plus, they get access to any of the updates to the course as you hear me talking about it. So it's a pretty good deal for people. So you can go to practiceoftherapy.com and just click on the courses button that you'll see at the top of the web page, and that'll get you to the right place to check it out. So love for you to go check it out, if you will. And also, before we get to my conversation with Steve, would love for you to hear from our sponsors of the podcast, Mental Health Match and TherapyNotes. Most of us in private practice know that using directories can be a good source of new referrals, but which directories are really worth it? I'm excited to share with you Mental Health Match, which can help you stand out and connect with the clients that are a best fit for your practice. Mental Health Match helps nearly 50,000 clients find a therapist every month. Their smart technology ensures you get shown only to the clients who are a good fit for your practice, based on the client's presenting issues, cultural needs, and budget. And their matching system helps clients feel an initial sense of confidence in you as a clinician. If you're looking for a new source of clients, try Mental Health Match for free today. Just go to mentalhealthmatch.com and use the referral code PRACTICE for 90 days of use free. Trusted by thousands of clinicians across the U.S., Mental Health Match is ready to help you grow your practice with the clients you want. That's mentalhealthmatch.com, and be sure and use the referral code PRACTICE.
Is your practice running like a well-oiled machine? One of the keys to a successful private practice is having the right systems and processes in place to make things run as smoothly as possible. With a powerful, secure, and streamlined system like TherapyNotes, you'll have more time to spend with what matters most, your clients. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. It's the EHR that Gordon uses in his practice. By using TherapyNotes, your clinical records will be secure with less paperwork, which means you can give a much better quality of care. TherapyNotes integrates all aspects of your practice to help you improve patient care. Be sure and check them out today by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm so glad for you to get to know Steve Bisson. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Well, yes, I'm looking forward to meeting you too. I haven't talked to you in a while.
Yes. So Steve and I kind of connected through our podcasting circles and that sort of thing. And I'm really looking forward to you to getting to know his story. So, Steve, as I start out with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
I am a mental health counselor. I'm born and raised in Montreal. That's why you say Bisson, not Bisson.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in the United States since 1999, and now I'm an American citizen as of last year. So,
yes,
very happy to be a citizen now.
Uh-huh.
I came here because in Montreal, I got my bachelor's at McGill University, couldn't get a job up there. And so I decided that, I saw this thing in the Montreal Gazette that had a boat on it. And I'm thinking I'm going to work on a boat. Apparently a boat is in Framingham, Massachusetts. So who knew? And that's pretty landlocked. But I worked for a nonprofit organization for 15 years. They helped me get my master's at Assumption University in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I have been a mental health counselor since 2003. Really enjoy my work. I've been in private practice for about 10 years, and I've had a podcast for about a year and a half.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's great. That's great. So tell us a little bit about your kind of your niche and your specialties and that sort of thing.
Well, I worked with the nonprofit. I went to work at different places in the criminal justice system. I like to call it community justice system. So I worked in the jail first. I worked at parole then. And then I got probation. I worked in what they now call recovery courts, and they used to be called drug courts. And I ended up working also with the police in a diversion program that's now called a co-response model. So I got to really talk to a lot of those individuals and see where their issues come from. And a lot of it had to do with, the stigma, how to reach out to people. And, everyone saying to them, like, you chose this job, you need to put up with it. And no one chooses to put up with trauma. I mean, that's not what we sign up for. So I really wanted to work with individuals with trauma, wanted to work with the first responders because I know I can lift the stigma. And my straight to the point, no pun intended, that's the name of my company, straight to the point therapy is kind of like really refreshing. A lot of the guys really appreciate that. I just feel like we want people in the community who are taking care of our safety probably to be stable mentally. Call me crazy.
Yeah, and it's certainly much needed. I know got some family members that are in law enforcement and first responders and that sort of thing. And I know in my conversations with them, they, I think the trauma that they go through, I think it goes unrecognized. And I think there's probably, a term that we use a lot is vicarious trauma. I think there's a lot of that goes on for first responders.
And I think that it's also misunderstood that the trauma that they go through is not like the first trauma you see. It could be the 27. It could be the first one. But typically what I've had is that people have accumulated a lot of this stuff. And then they have kind of a response. Vicarious trauma is one of them. And, let's not forget that trauma and PTSD are two different things. And I think that trauma needs to be treated as such and not necessarily give everyone a PTSD label necessarily. They can have that, but I don't throw that label around easily because there is some stuff that comes from that. Right.
Yeah. So you've made kind of this journey through working in kind of in the justice system and then also in kind of an agency settings and different forms and fashions. And then you made the transition to private practice. So tell us about that transition and how that came about for you.
Yes. So I cheated just like just about everyone. I started my private practice at the same time as I was working for that nonprofit organization. And, by working with the first responders and that agency, they kind of like noticed that like, well, Steve works well with first responders. He's a straight to the point guy. He's going to give you no BS. He's going to just get it at you. So I ended up getting a lot of referrals in that way. And I'm also trained in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So I get a lot of people who are having trauma issues and want to process the stuff that may be older. What I've what I've also said to a lot of people is that I really want to give people hope that there's life after all this and that they can get through this. The memory is going to be there. I think that that's one of the biggest misconceptions. Therapy will not fix the memory. The memory is going to be there. It's just not having that strong reaction to it. That's really the key. And that's the journey I've taken. I've worked with a lot with depression and anxiety. And I really enjoy working with that too, because changing the thought process is so essential. And I've been very lucky and fortunate to have full referrals for about 5 years. Wow. So even before the pandemic, and I'm just very, grateful that people have done that. I just hope that I give people the space to be themselves, but I also want to call them on stuff that they're trying to avoid. So that's kind of how I work.
Right. Yeah. So you made that transition into private practice. Were you seeing kind of the same niche of clients as you were in the agency setting, or did it change a little bit?
Well, just like anything else, it changes with time. So my first referrals were first responders or people with substance use issues. The reason why working in the community justice system, you see a lot of people with substance use issues and they don't take the mental health part of it. And I think that it's very important. In Massachusetts, you can see both substance abuse and mental health at the same time. Check with your local state officials in case, because some places it's treated separately. So I got a lot of those referrals and people would be like, there's a probationer out in here. I wasn't working with probation anymore. Can you work with him? Or if I was, someone had a problem with the police to say, look, this guy really needs help. So I got a lot of those referrals sent to me besides the first responders, which, I really like doing that. I eventually, like, I still work with substance use. Don't get me wrong. I think that for me, my point of view is we all have an addiction. I think that we're all addicted to something. Some of it healthy, some of it's not so much. And so I work with addiction now, but mostly like the trauma stuff that I talked about earlier. The reason why is just by default. I mean, and they became my niche. I think that what hopefully with people like you, Gordon, that are very, very good at training people. I started off with no niche, and I just took everyone that came along. I'm trained in children and family therapy. That's actually my degree from Assumption. Today, I see no children, no families. But at the beginning, I was taking him on, and I'm like, no, stop, Steve. You don't like it.
Yeah.
So I think that what I really saw is that you can take a niche and be okay with that. And I think that a lot of people struggle with doing that originally. And programs like yours, Gordon, really benefit a whole lot of people.
Right. Yeah. I was, as you were saying all that, I was just kind of remembering how it was for me when I moved into private practice. What was interesting is that I was working for an agency, and we mainly worked with at-risk children and youth. And so when I went into private practice, I really switched over to working more with adults and couples and that kind of thing. And really realized, down the road is that I wasn't, the agency I was working for really wasn't a great niche for me, because I didn't really enjoy working with children that much. It's not that I don't like children or that sort of thing, but as my daughter used to say when she was little, is I sucked at playing Barbies. So I mean, it's just I didn't really didn't have as good of I guess a gift or talent to kind of connect with younger folks as I do adults and couples and that kind of thing. So that's
I've also said to people, it's not working with kids that bothered me. It's working with the parents.
Yeah.
Because I think that some of the kids just have the genuine wanting to change, but if you don't have the parents on board, which typically, is very difficult. That's the part I didn't like personally. So when you said that, I'm like, oh, I got to say that because it's that's just what happened.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And so I think, to your point though, Steve, is that I think as we move through all of this, our focus and our niches can change, and we can, and I think as much as anything, give ourselves permission to do that. Like you said, you had originally gotten your degree in family and children, and that might change over time, and all of that skill set translates well to a lot of different areas.
I agree. And I think that that's what we learned too, because it can bring those skills. And then some of the skills you kind of like force when you're doing a certain niche, like having children and family. And I'm like, why do I want to force myself? And then I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist mostly, besides the trauma work. So I found that so much more reachable with adults. And maybe I'll go back to children and family, doing the family systems is great, but that's not my strength. But maybe my strength in 10 years. I think that it's important to kind of give yourself some openness, because if you don't have some openness, you tend to get stuck at where you're at.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, again, our skill set as therapists and counselors translates in a lot of ways across a lot of different venues and career kind of choices. So, yeah. So to change gears a little bit, I know one of the things that you've kind of moved into as well is coaching. And then also you've started your podcast. So tell us about all of that.
Well, let's start off a little bit with the coaching. So emotional management coaching was actually launched officially in December of 2022. So very recent for most people. I saw a need that people understand their feelings. And what I mean by that is we default to what's comfortable to ourselves. So if anger is comfortable for you, you default to anger. If your sadness is comfortable for you, you go to sadness. But behind sadness, behind anger, behind fear, there's another complex set of emotions that go with that. It's not simple fear. The example I give is, while I'm very comfortable with Gordon, looking forward to it and happy to do your podcast, there's a little fear of what I'm going to say next and how it's going to go, and there's some trepidation that goes with that. And acknowledging all those emotions can help you move forward. And I think that that's part of it. I think that there's a lot more than what I just said for my emotional management coaching, but it's essentially where we want to get to. And the other thing too, is I find coaching to be reachable for people outside of my state. So my licensure is for Massachusetts alone. So by being able to be a coach, I feel like I can reach so many more people, which has always been one of my goals. I mean, people talk about what their legacy is going to be. I don't know what my legacy is going to be, frankly, but being able to get a legacy of helping people with emotional management and helping people deal with that. I don't want to limit that to Massachusetts alone. I'd like to bring a lot of people on board. And speaking French myself as my first language, I'd love to work with people from Quebec, France, any other country that speaks French. So that's why I started that. So that's part of the issue of working in just therapy in your little area. But those difficulties.
Right. Yeah. So, I think one question that comes up for a lot of people as they move into the coaching realm, how do you define for yourself really kind of the difference between therapy and coaching?
It's interesting because it was on my podcast. Someone put it into simple terms, and I love the simple terms to use because that's the type of guy I am. Therapy is almost like the past and how to process the past in order to move better future-wise. Coaching is to look at the present and how you're going to change in the future and where we're going to get to in the future and how to set goals and set boundaries around that. So I think that that's how someone defined it. And I really enjoyed the fact that it was a simple way of explaining. I'm not talking about your past. If it's your past, you need to go to therapy. You need to address that in therapy. If we're setting goals for managing our emotions, where we're going to go in the future, how we're going to balance the mind, body, spirit, that's all the future. That's what coaching is all about. And that's what I do in emotional management.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I like that definition. Another one I would add to that is I heard, again, somebody on my podcast kind of defined it as, therapy, like you said, works with stuff from the past and our, what we're dealing with internally and all of that sort of thing. Whereas coaching is more helping people kind of work through a specific problem of, that sort of thing. Yeah. But it really, as I think about what you described, Steve, really kind of your niche with your coaching is really teaching people emotional intelligence as much as anything.
Emotional intelligence, an emotional code is so important for that. I mean, I love to read. I like to learn. And, you talked about earlier with therapy. I think for coaching, this is where I am today. Where I'm going to be in the year may or may not be the same place. And that's okay because you get more information and you get more informed as to what you want to work on. So to me, like the coaching is so beneficial because it is a movable, what's the best word I can say? Target, because you can get to different things because maybe you learn that, embracing that spirituality helps people manage their emotions better. So getting to that point, how do we get to a spiritual belief system that helps and is providing to you? So I think that you're right. I think that thinking about it as, the future and how to manage all that is very important. I agree.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a good distinction. And I think that there are a lot of people that, coaching really could actually help them more than therapy does. And so I think, it's not one size fits all kind of thing.
And honestly, I have my mental health therapist. I work on stuff with him. And I have my business coach and I work with her on different things and they're very different. And I think that sometimes we limit ourselves to one or the other. Why can't we have both? I mean, I know someone who has, a mental health counselor, has someone who does their coaching for life, and then they have a business coach. And it really helps them in all those realms. And sometimes that's better because, business coaching may not be your thing if you're a life coach. So helping yourself is by getting all these resources available to you.
Right. Very, very good point. And I think, again, just kind of reflecting on how it is for me in my life, I have a therapist that I work with regularly. And then I have my mastermind groups where other business people, and we deal with specifically business issues and growing our practices and all of that kind of thing. So that's, very good point. So,
And
so
I like
go
that.
ahead.
No,
Yeah.
I was just going to say the other point too about emotional management in the future is that we look at what you're doing now and how it's going to grow you in the future. I think growth in that way is also another way to think about coaching.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good. So, tell us about your podcast. That's exciting.
Well, I can't describe it in an easy way because I love my podcast. I really enjoy doing what I do. I think it's another way to get the message out there and helping people all over the place. It started off when I wrote a book called Finding Your Way Through Therapy. And someone said, your chapters are really podcasts. It's a good book, but how about you do a podcast on one of them is called Trauma and PTSD Are Not the Same. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And I hum and hawed for about 8 months. And then someone told me, just press record and then you'll be fine. And yeah, you listen to my first episode, it might be a little more robotic, for lack of a better word. But as we go along and how I've grown, I'm up to 80 or so episodes, a little more than that right now. And I've seen, I've met with guests that are regular. I tell people I have a couple of regular guests, and the reason why they're regular guests are people I know, and we have a good chemistry. It really works well. And I have people I meet from all walks of life. And this is where you can open up so many things with the podcast. I love talking to a coach from Minnesota who talks about money, and then talk about someone who does anxiety coaching out in, I think she's in Hong Kong, and then working with someone who talks about her own physical coaching down in South Carolina and everywhere in between. I'm just giving those, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's just being able to tell people, yes, finding your way through therapy is not Steve's method. It could be Jill, John, Gordon, Lisa, whoever it is.
Right.
And my podcast is so fun for that. And it brings me to other points of view sometimes. I mean, I had someone who did, if people go and check me out, I don't look exactly like a dancer. But someone brought in expressive therapy, and we started talking about that. And I'm like, wow, actually, I do a little bit of expressive therapy. That's what a podcast is. And I think that what I've always enjoyed too is getting a little bit of what I like to do. And part of the podcast is also not just me interviewing people, although I enjoy that. I also put in I've recently done my reviews of my own chapters. I mean, 2 years removed, you want to see if it's still true or not. So I kind of reviewed my own chapters critically, and that was helpful. And then start talking about stuff as easy as, we're talking about the Olympics last year, for example, and when someone was having issues with their mental health and not being able to participate, how do we accept that, and how do we stop judging people, because it is hard to talk about mental health.
Right. One of the things that I think is I love about this is the fact that and we've seen this, as I don't know if it's fair to say we're coming out of the COVID pandemic or not, but it seems like it's here for a while. But I know one of the things that has kind of been a silver lining of that is it gave people the freedom to talk about mental health, and the fact that is, everyone deals with it at different levels. And I think when you can hear other people's stories about their own struggles and the way that they've dealt with it and the way they kind of work through it, it really gives people the freedom to change and also just feel not so alone in it all.
I agree 100%. I think that's why finding your way through therapy, pretty much every single interview I have, I think question number 2 is usually the standard. Have you been in therapy? What was your experience? So that way people don't feel so alone, and maybe their experience was different than yours, and that's okay. And maybe it was good or bad. Ultimately, I just want to create that there's no stigma about therapy. And ultimately, I give a little bit of my tidbits too. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and there's nothing wrong with that. You don't like working with me? Hey, no harm, no foul. Let's find someone else. And that's what therapy is all about. And I think that that's also, besides, like you said, the opening of, the talk about mental health since the pandemic started, and I'm with you. I don't know if it's over. It just opens up that ability to say, wait a minute, therapy can work for me. And I think that that's something that had so much stigma even 3 years ago.
Yeah. So, it's, and I think it's, hopefully we're moving out of that whole stigmatized thing around mental health. And I think I think too, it's, I'm going to sound like I'm going to put on my old fart hat here, but I think it's generational as well. I know, not to, I'm in that, hate to say it, and people can go ahead and say it of me. Okay, boomer. I'm of the boomer generation, and there was a lot of stigma around mental health and in that generation. But I think, now that we're more and more people are talking about it, it's less stigma.
I agree 100%. And yeah, you're saying you're a boomer. I'm a Generation Xer.
Mm-hmm.
And, a little bit of what I share with people, I share my story in my podcast. And one of them is at 12 years old, my best friend died in a fire.
Mm.
And when we heard it on the news, I heard his name. My parents turned to me and said, he played football with me. My parents turned to me and said, well, that sucks. Now, you got to work harder on Saturday for your football game. And there was my whole grief process.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm not blaming my parents, anyone listening to that, or hopefully my mom is not listening, but if she is, I'm not blaming her whatsoever. That was the sign of the times. And I think that that's, she was a boomer. She is a boomer. He was a boomer. And it's not gone completely, but I think that by lifting the stigma from a Generation Xer, from a boomer, from whoever you want to talk about, I think that we're just doing a lot of the stuff that will help, future generations, either through our podcasts that we do or anybody else for that matter, just to get away from like, okay, mental health is just like physical health. It's the same exact thing in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. And what it comes down to is, I think with all of this, is helping people learn how to, as I like to say, sit with their emotions, but also be accepting of their emotions, of not putting any judgment on that. And that, also that there are some emotions that absolutely suck and are absolutely painful, but we move through that, and equipping people to move through it without feeling a sense of panic or that kind of thing around it.
And you talk about, the panic, and, I think people have this perception that some others have it easy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anyone who has any easy life. They have some good moments, and maybe they have more good moments, but they still have a hard time. And I think that that's the other part of mental health that you just talked about, lifting that stigma of it can be hard for anyone, even the ones who look so happy. And, we've had a few examples, unfortunately, of suicide in recent months. That shows that even as you're happy as you can be, because it might be stigmatized, maybe it's because you don't want to reach out. It's very difficult to address. So that's what hopefully we're doing through these podcasts and coaching and everything else.
Right. Well, Steve, I want to be respectful of your time, and I'm really glad we had this conversation. And folks, I'm sure you're going to get to hear Steve some more on this podcast and other podcasts. But Steve, tell folks how they can get in touch with you and connect with you.
There's many ways, but you can definitely go to my website, steve-bisson.com. And there is a way you link right to my email from there. You can also go to Instagram, where I am my Instagram is real Steve Bisson. I like to say real, but maybe that's my own French side. And you can also listen to my podcast just about every platform, finding your way through therapy on every platform that you can think of.
Well, Steve, it's been a pleasure chatting, and I hope that we can get together again here soon. Well, again, thanks to Steve for being on the podcast, and I'm sure you'll get to hear more from Steve here before too long. The other thing too about my conversation with Steve is really those are the kinds of meaningful conversations that I really enjoy having here on the podcast. With this podcast, my goal is to let you hear from people that are going to give you good information and also be maybe a little bit motivational or be inspiring to you, and just thinking about your own practice and your own work in this whole mental health field. And I know my conversation with Steve just kind of reinforced that for me as well. And this is why I love doing this podcast. And also be sure and check out Steve's podcast, Your Way Through Therapy. And you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'll have some links here for you to connect with Steve. And thanks to Steve for being on the podcast. And I think I'm going to be on his podcast before too terribly long. But we're getting the details of that worked out. So also, if you're interested in being a contributor to the updates of the Practice of Therapy Google Workspace for Therapists course, again, you can go to practiceoftherapy.com/GWS updates and apply to be a contributor. I'd love to hear from you. So be sure and check that out. And also, a quick shout out here to my other fellow podcasters that are part of the PsychCraft Network. Steve mentioned in this episode our mutual friend Lisa Mustard, and Lisa is part in her podcast. The Therapy Show is part of the PsychCraft Network, and so you can find out about Lisa's podcast and several others by going to psychcraftnetwork.com. And it's a network that we formed back in 2022. And I'm real excited about you hearing from those other people that are in this podcasting, therapy, self-help space. Because, I just feel like, I'm a big believer in podcasts. As you might guess. Anyway, not to go too far down a rabbit hole again. So thanks again for listening. Be sure and follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. And also, I'd love for you to check out our sponsors of the podcast, in particular, one of our newer sponsors, Mental Health Match. And Mental Health Match is one of the directories that I can highly recommend. And it's more likely than any other directory to send inquiries from clients that are really a better match for you and your practice. They have a smart matching system that's low cost and over 10,000 clients coming every week. Mental Health Match is a great way to find the clients you want. And you can try Mental Health Match for free for 90 days. Just go to mentalhealthmatch.com and use the referral code PRACTICE. And also, big thanks to our other sponsor, TherapyNotes, therapynotes.com. They are who I use in my practice, and they are one of the leading electronic health record systems for mental health providers. And be sure and use the promo code GORDON, just GORDON, and you can try them out for 2 months for free. So be sure and check them out. Check them both out, mentalhealthmatch.com and therapynotes.com. Big thanks to them for being part of this journey with me and sponsoring this podcast. So take care, folks, and we'll look forward to being with you next week. You've been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. You can find out more about the other great podcasts in the network by visiting psychcraftnetwork.com. And if you haven't done so already, please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com and get your free private practice startup guide, along with a lot of other great resources and webinars and free things just by visiting. Also, be sure to follow us wherever you might be listening to your podcasts. This podcast is intended to be educational in purpose and is not intended to give legal, accounting, or counseling advice. If you need a professional, find the right person for that.